I'm Mark Juergensmeyer. I'm a professor of sociology and global studies and director of the Orfalea Center for Global and International Studies at the University of California, Santa Barbara. Yeah, sometimes people ask how a nice guy like me would get involved in the subject of terrorism and religious activism and violence around the world. Well, it's an interesting question, and it's a simple story because for years I studied the interaction of religion and society, religion and politics in India. And then in the 1980s, there was a spiral of violence between this young Sikh activist in Punjab and the Indian government that led to the assassination of Indira Gandhi and the killing of thousands of Sikhs throughout North India. So I wanted to know why. I wanted to know why religion had anything to do with this and why this was happening at this particular moment of history, this moment at the end of the Cold War and the rise of globalization, as increasingly, not only in India but around the world, new movements of religious activism arose. So I began to focus on that problem, not just in India but increasingly around the world, in the Middle East, in Southeast Asia, in East Asia, in the United States, wherever movements of religious violence have occurred. And I found some common themes going through all of these cases, and they related to the common problem that all of us face with a globalized world, this loss of a sense of identity, of accountability, of stability, in a world that seems increasingly to many of us to be slightly out of control. So it's this intellectual concern, along with the normative concern of being someone who is a pacifist, who I'm concerned about peace, of trying to reduce the level of violence in the world. But one has to understand why violence erupts. One has to care deeply about the concerns of those people who perpetrate those acts and support them in order to understand why they occur and what can be done differently in order to alleviate the suffering that occurs in so many parts of the world, not only by the acts of violence by those who perpetrate them, but also in many cases by the militant response to those acts and by the kind of anguish of the social anguish that produced the conditions in the first place. So this small way, a very particular study of a very particular problem emerged ultimately into a very broad case project of being concerned with the forces of globalization at this moment of history and how it's erupted in so many parts of the world in violent responses. Yeah, one of the paradoxes of the religious activism of the last 20 years or so is that I think they've created a somber reality in the minds of many of us that religion can play a striking role in public life. It obviously has done in a very destructive way in the kinds of militant acts that we see as terrorism. But we also see the remarkable power of religion to mobilize people, and also the potency of the religious critique about what many religious activists see as the excesses of secular life, the corruption, the greed, the soullessness of modern existence that all of us feel to some extent. And I think there's a kind of awareness that the attempt of Enlightenment thinkers to make a dramatic distinction between the realm of spiritual and moral virtue and the realm of public and economic life, it's never always really worked all that well. That we do want to think of our public figures as imbued with a sense of moral and religious purpose, and that is something that religion, at least in a general sense, can bring to the social imagination. So it can play a positive role in this whole division between the secular and religion, I think, is increasingly being rethought. So I think in that sense, that religion, not in a narrow sense of particular beliefs, because we also, I think, react strongly when we try to impose our one person's religious ideas on the other. But we do want to have some sense of spiritual depth and moral purpose in public life. The dramatic change in 9/11 was not so much in the activists who created the terrorist acts in the first place, but our response to it. This thinking of a conflict with religious activism as a war on terror, which was always wrong-headed in my mind because it militarized a conflict that should have been seen as a problem really more in criminal terms and as a few extreme people rather than as a war with a whole civilization. But that way of thinking created a whole new set of problems, a whole new kind of dynamic and tension within the world. And so increasingly I was concerned not just with the militant acts that created the tension, but with the militant response and the whole nexus of militant thinking in this particular moment of the post-cold globalized world. My latest book, Global Rebellion, the subtitle is Religious Challenges to the Secular State, it serves two purposes. One is the rethinking of an earlier book called The New Cold War that was first published in 1993 when religious activism was first surfacing after the end of the old Cold War. And I was worried that there was a kind of Cold War mentality on both sides. That is, that we, like just as we used to think of the socialist world as those godless commies, we would think of religious activists as, you know, Islamofascist or some other kind of epithet that would kind of make them the other, the enemy, and vice versa. Alas, to a large extent that's come to pass. And the question mark I had after the new Cold War in the earlier book, I think can be removed because it is in fact a kind of stereotype that many of us would like very much to move beyond. So this book revisits the theses of that book, in many cases to affirm them, that movements of religious activism are responses to what they perceive to be a kind of extreme secularism and as an attempt to try to remove religious values from public life and to reassert the importance of the role of those values, not for religious reasons really, but more for social reasons, because of a loss of identity, because of a feeling that moral accountability is lost in the modern world, because of concern about safety, of security, of wanting to know that we are secure as a people. Those are all social concerns, but that they're often articulated in religious language, which is what this rebellion is about, because it happens in every religious tradition all over the world. It's not a peculiarity of Islam or any other single religion. There are far more acts of Christian violence in the United States than Muslim violence. Christian terrorism, the collapse of the Oklahoma City Federal Building, for example. So it's a generic problem. And of course my question is why? Why is this happening now? Why is religion related to it? Why is this happening in so many parts of the world? So this book, Global Rebellion, gave me the opportunity to take all of the work I've been doing and expand it to try to cover every case. It's both meant to be inclusive. It's a pretty encyclopedic book in the sense that I try to deal with all cases of religious activism around the world in the last 20, 30 years. And then come up with some sort of comprehensive way of understanding how they're related. What are the themes that go through them? And they're the ones that I just talked about, a kind of common sense of concern about the state of public life in this moment of late modernity and the end of the Cold War, the rise of globalization, kind of cry for a new sense of identity, a new sense of moral accountability, a new kind of security that I think is worth all of us taking a look at. We need to listen to these cries. We need to understand how powerful these critiques are, not only in the voices of religious activists, but within our own lives. That this is something that modern societies have to deal with as we emerge into a new world order in the 21st century.